It's
I feel like I just did this yesterday.
Wednesday Night Live
Yes.
in Southampton.
Let me do this. All right, welcome everybody to the Board of Selectmen's meeting for January 10th. It's 5 o'clock. This meeting is being recorded and broadcast. We will start our meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
This is a special meeting with the Board of Selectmen, Finance Committee, and other committees relative to revenues. The focus of the meeting is about revenues, income, so on and so forth. I'd like to open up this meeting with Finance Committee. Is the Finance Committee here as a quorum?
Not yet. It's scheduled as a quorum, but we are missing a representative. So,
Okay.
I'm sure. Yeah.
I understand. I'm just trying to, you know,
We'll turn into a quorum shortly.
it'll turn to a quorum shortly. Okay. We have the town accountant here, town treasurer here. Okay. All right.
I'm right here. Oh, there she is.
And there she is. Okay. Finance Committee requested this to start off so that we could have open discussion relative to the issues. One of the issues has to do, or part of the issues has to do with the special town meeting. You want to tackle that first, Mike?
Sure. Michael Rosenberg, 144 East Street, Finance Committee Chair. So one of the reasons we called for the meeting, and we asked to, meet as a group, is to discuss where we are financially, today for FY18 and where we're looking to be for FY19. Taking into consideration projections for next year, how do the articles that are proposed for the special town meeting, how may those affect the FY19 budget? For instance, if we increase spending at the special town meeting for the remainder of this year that will subsequently be at the same level for next year, how is that going to impact operations of the town, basically? I think one of the first things on the agenda we had here was the 18 revenue and expenses. I didn't get a chance to go through all of them today, but just, are we, and this is kind of I'm assuming an open dialogue conversation, with Vicki, are we in areas where we feel like we're going to be over on major expenses? Are there things out there that are going to create issues at the end of the year?
The problem is Vicki's not.
I just noticed she walked away. So we can, I guess, table that and go to the special town meeting item. So
Why don't you pick the articles of concern, and that way we'll at least have those.
So the articles of concern were centered around transferring from one reoccurring cost line item to another reoccurring cost line item. Basically taking, if you have a $100 budget, taking 50 from that budget and adding it to another, because in next year you're still going to have to replenish that 50 to the original 100, and you're also going to have to fill the 50 that you moved to that other line item. I should have had all these marked. So the first item was the transfer from ambulance receipts to ambulance operating accounts and the salary account. So the question there,
Number is it?
21 and 22.
21 and 22. The question there had to do with the transferring from those receipts. So every year we transfer $130,000, $40,000, $20,000 from ambulance receipts to help fund the fire department EMS. If we're now looking to transfer more at a special town meeting to fund that department, how is that going to affect FY19? Are there enough revenues in ambulance receipts to cover the added transfer? If we're transferring an extra $65,000, I think was the roundabout number. If we're transferring an extra 65,000 to cover that added shift and some of the added expenses, are the revenues going to be able to fund that for next year? If they're not, where are we going to find the revenues for that? So I would ask Vicki to speak to that, because I know she worked on that today. Just where we are with the revenues for ambulance receipts, is it something that we can anticipate would cover funding the third shift for next year?
This will be in your package, which is what
Hi.
you keep prepared on.
Vicki Morrow, Town Accountant, Pomeroy Meadow Road. So I went through, Chief, did you get this? Okay. Did you get this? Okay. So what I tried to do was look at the revenues that we've collected. What?
Oh, Mike and I are just laughing that we just got this information.
Yeah,
It's like,
Well, you just did it today, though, right?
I just did it,
that's
so
fine.
I guess what I was trying to explain was I was trying to figure out how to put
we
this
don't look at it
into
as fault, we understand.
kind of some sort of semblance of numbers, because there's, and the chief can probably explain better than I can, there's so many factors that fall into what you collect, what you don't collect. So if you look at the revenues we collected from 2012 until 2018, we've definitely increased, and the most significant was from 2016 to 2017. In 2016, we collected 155,000. In 2017, we collected 180,000. But if you look at what we've actually committed, what we've billed out per the billing company on the summaries I get every month, we had a huge increase in what we billed out for 17 than we did in 16. So I would anticipate that if you bill out more, you're going to collect more. And I extrapolate that from all the numbers. So I also tried to look at where we were year-to-date going back to 2012. And it's relatively consistent. Last year in 17, we had a little bit more collected in December than in previous years. But if you look at from 12 all the way to 16, it's been $83,000 to $85,000 that we've collected mid-year. What that means, I'm not quite sure, because I was just trying to compare, are we really behind? And if we're really behind, then are our calls behind? Are our commitments to the billing behind? And they're pretty consistent at this stage of the game. But you can't say, oh, we're halfway through the year like you do with the budget and say, oh, they're going to double by the end of the year. We don't know that. I mean, ultimately, you want to capture as much of the billing as you possibly can for the calls that you go out on, but the bottom line goal is you don't want to go on that many calls, right? That's what the bottom line is.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So do you think, or maybe the chief can answer this, is the $25,000 extra that we've collected between 2016 and 2017, is that higher level, paramedic level service that's getting billed out? Yes.
Yeah, I would, more calls coming in, more calls being
So
covered.
less mutual aid.
Is that going to, Chief, going to continue more? Where are we with mutual aid versus what we're doing?
No, we've been doing an outstanding job of coverage, and,
You may want to go up there so everybody can hear.
If you're, this page that says less fees for outsource, that is what our mutual aid has been, over the past 5 years.
Waiting for my glasses, all I see is little dots on this now.
and it's,
I'm with you, John, I'm struggling over here.
yeah, it's deceiving also, because in the past, if we didn't cover a call and it went to another town, they collected 100% of the revenue from that call. When you look at the mutual aid numbers, it's when we call in a paramedic.
Right.
So if we call in a paramedic from Easthampton, whatever it is, to ride with our basic level ambulance service, then we pay out for that medic. Although we get to bill out as a paramedic level ride, which is considerably more than if someone goes in as a basic level ambulance. So some of those numbers can seem a bit confusing. The number of calls that we have for people at the station, with our ambulance going out, we have covered more calls than we ever have.
Right.
It's increased, last year, and certainly this year it's projected to, it's on that same track.
But that's your goal, having the shifts
Well, our
there,
goal is to,
obviously,
yes,
right?
absolutely, cover all
That's
the
what
calls.
you're building towards.
And you're gonna have, as with every department, we go to Westfield, which has 5 ambulances, we go to Easthampton. You're always gonna have the situation like we had 2 nights ago, where we had, our ambulance just went out on a call, I went out on a fire call, and then 2 other calls came in within 5 minutes. So you're not gonna be able to cover 100% of all your calls. But we cover the majority of our calls, and the group has really been doing well. So how that's reflected is in our increased revenue overall, so that 2016 increase, 2017 increase is due to us covering
Okay.
calls.
But I think the misconception is, and correct me if I'm wrong, because we've had this discussion, where you're gonna add this third shift or these extra hours, you're gonna gain that much more in revenue than you already have. And more than likely, you're
Yeah,
probably not gonna gain as much as you think you're gonna gain.
Yeah, and I think there needs to be, I want to be very clear about that, because I don't want the false expectation to think that with what we're trying to do by piecing together coverage, especially as this town meeting comes forward, we're doing stopgap measures to comply with the state standard, which we've been out of compliance with the state since 2016, October 2016. And not meeting state regulations is a huge liability just in itself. I think that through the select board and through the actions that we've taken, we've satisfied the state because they don't want to see us lose an ambulance service. And so every move that we've made, every town meeting that we've gone to, every bit that we've added to the budget, they've been happy with. Unfortunately, in December, when we have our annual ambulance inspection, they gave us an order of notice. And an order of notice is a thing that says that if you don't comply in 30 days, the state could potentially fine you $500 a day. They're not interested in really doing that, but it emphasizes the seriousness of our situation and the fact that we need to do what we said we were going to do. So in 2013, when they signed in and said that they'd have an ambulance fully staffed by October 2016, it's like 2018, and we're not there yet.
Okay, but let me rein you back in.
Sure.
Because there was a question that was asked relative to the revenue projections coming in.
Yep.
I don't want to go too far afield of all this and just focus on that question right now.
Okay. The challenge is that we're not doing it just because we're trying to balance. We're not a company that's saying we're increasing revenue, so we're increasing staffing. That's not what's happening. We're increasing staffing to meet this state standard. And the false conception that I want to avoid is that although we cover most of our calls right now, and it works very well, it doesn't meet state standard. It's the most
Chief, I'm going to be very...
It's the most cost-effective way to do it, but we need to get the additional shift and the overnight. So for me, when I look at it and I see they're trying to, what's our revenue projections? I mean, I heard some revenue projections. We're doing about as well as we did. It's projected about the same. That's all well and good. I can see by the calls that we're covering that we're on that track. There's no way to guarantee revenue, and we're not going to get increased revenue by fulfilling the state requirement. We're actually, it's going to cost us a little bit more.
I perceive this in a whole different angle.
Okay.
I look at it that your call volume is increasing because of the need of the community.
Correct.
The state on the side with their mandated regulations and stuff is one thing, but your call volume's increasing because the requirements of the community are increasing.
Absolutely, yeah.
That's what we're really wrestling with. We have more need here.
Yep.
And we need to expand this and move forward because of that.
But I also think it's a point well taken that you're saying, because I saw the copy of the letter from the state, and they're waiting until the January 16th town meeting to issue us a license. So I think it's a very good point, and I do agree also that we have to look at the coverage and the money coming in, and make
I
good
mean, I
decisions.
believe it's a
but-
valuable service. I mean, of course, you probably expect that when I come up here, but, the men and women, we're up to almost 54 now, that are all part-time, not getting any overtime or sick time or vacation, are doing a tremendous job of coverage. We're providing service to the town that's absolutely valuable. And we don't ask any other town entity to pay for itself. So although the revenue is important, it's important that we do our billing absolutely correctly and follow through with our billing company to make sure that revenues are maximized. We want to look to make sure that we're charging competitive rates for our ambulance so that our revenue is maximized. But the point of what I'm trying to do is provide the best coverage to this town, which it needs.
Were you also saying, though, that by having paramedic level service through the night, that you're not expecting a windfall of money?
No, because what it is, if we could continue to provide service the way we are, we're covering calls. The problem is that it doesn't meet the state regulation. So if we could continue the way we are, it's the least expensive way to do it, because we're just paying $275 approximately to get a paramedic to ride on our ambulance.
Mm-hmm.
But the state says that you need to have a dedicated paramedic in town, ready for service, or pay for another community to do that. When we had projected out for another community to cover those costs, I mean, it was $900,000 for some of those coverage costs. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So the cheapest alternative is to use our part-time labor that we have been doing, and it'll be our medic that's in shift and covering that call, so we don't have to pay out $275, but we're not going to be gaining any more than that $275 per call. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So if we're paying out approximately, $800 to $1,000, and I'm just shooting from the hip here, and certainly correct me, but if we're paying $800 to $1,000 a month for that, those medics to come from another community to get on our basic level bus, we'll save that money. And that may be, $8,000 a year. But we're not going to save more than that. We'll just be able to cover it from in-house with what we're proposing to put across.
And one of the keys is by covering from in-house, the person is there
The person
immediately.
is there, and it's service to the community, absolutely. Yeah. And that's where the liability factor comes in, where somebody, potentially says you weren't there.
Yeah.
And the state says you should have been.
So past practice or previous history has been, when we transferred money from the ambulance receipts to cover the ambulance, it had been almost exactly what it cost to run the ambulance back in 2010, 2011, 2012. But it was volunteer, and we had a part-time chief. And so there wasn't the coverage, there wasn't all that. So we could take the $140,000. And back then, we were taking free cash to balance the budget. So we took whatever we could out of there to supplement that, to cover that, because that's kind of how things were run. But I think going forward, we kind of, I don't want to say it's an arbitrary number, but it's an arbitrary number. Kind of like, okay, what do we think we can extrapolate and appropriate from that account in May without draining it, when we will know we'll need to pay for some of those interceptors and whatnot. We want to keep a little bit of a buffer in there. It wasn't an exact amount of money to cover everything that was being spent. It was, okay, I think we can take 150 out. I feel comfortable with taking that money out, with leaving this one in there for whatever may come down the road, and we use that as, interfund transfer between the receipts reserve and the general fund. So it was never, hey, we're going to take all this because it covers everything. It was, this is what we feel comfortable with appropriating to cover whatever costs the ambulance should incur. So that's kind of how it's been done. And so I believe that we would probably have the same amount of revenues as we did in 17 as we did in 18. $180,000, $200,000. So it all depends on, do we take the same 140 that we took last year, or do we take less because we want to leave more in there? It all depends on what's left in there. And it might not be $100,000 and $200,000 that we would collect by the end of the year, but we can only take out what we get in May. So if we get $40,000 at the end of May and June, I can't take that out at that point in time. So I guess it all depends on what the town feels comfortable with using to cover whatever costs the ambulance has. But, you know, the 140 will potentially be there in May to cover if the town feels they want to use the 140. We used 158 last year, or, yeah, then one year we used 100, one year we used 60, one year we covered the whole thing. So it all depends on, part of it is how much money do we really need revenues to balance the budget, which really shouldn't go that way. Like when you do indirect costs for enterprise funds, people are like, oh, well, we need that so we can balance the budget. That really should be kind of extra. It shouldn't be what the main purpose is to balance the budget, so. So that's about, all. I mean, at 19 we can't use because we won't have them yet, but 18, I would think it's gonna be pretty close to what we had this year in 17, based on kind of what we've collected so far. But if you have a drop in calls, then you're not gonna bill it out and you're not gonna collect it.
Well, it's like predicting excise revenue or workman's comp expense. I mean, you gotta take a best
Excise
shot
is
based
tough
on
too,
last year and the
based
year
on last
before.
year, yeah.
Use
That's what you're
historic-
doing.
Yeah, exactly. Use historic projections and do your best
Yeah,
to
right.
guess.
And then
No.
adjust as you go.
You know, because if, 13, 14, 15, and 16, 12 to 16 was all 150 to 162. Now we jump to 180.
Yep.
I think part of that, like you said, is the community and the additional coverage that you have to get those calls, so.
And the chief's goal is to maximize revenue kept within Southampton.
It's absolutely to
Yes,
maximize
yes.
revenue, but it's never gonna offset the complete ambulance budget. And so really, my goal is to provide the service.
So,
So maybe we field some questions from these guys and do you need us to answer them? Okay.
Possibly. Dan Pellegrini, 76 Crooked Ledge Road, member of the Finance Committee. On the subject of the finances to it, and I understand what the chief's doing with trying to provide the coverage, but, from a Finance Committee standpoint, we've asked for a couple things that we haven't gotten to help with this analysis. One, what's that call volume after hours? And two, what's the exact cost from the other towns? And if I just thought I heard the chief properly, he's talking $8,000-9,000 a year that we're paying other towns to cover us on that second or that third shift. The trailer alone we're looking to buy for them to sleep in is $35,000. Okay, so again, we've got to look at finances here and go into the third shift, because my understanding is other towns covering will meet the state mandate, and if we're talking, it won't?
Yeah, no, I mean, I've given a copy to the chair. This is the order notice. Basically, they can fine us $500 a day for not meeting, and they're gonna, and the letter that I'd also forwarded to them says that they are threatening to not give us a license.
Understood. So if we have another town cover after shift,
You're gonna have to
We're
pay for
not-
that other town, and the last cost we did were about almost $1 million.
and that's what we've been asking for, is to see those, to
I
help with that.
provided it in the past.
You've seen it?
Yeah, they were off the cuff quotes. I mean, it wasn't competitively bid, it wasn't
So-
competitively procured. to get-
Sounds like you have some of that information in your committee. so-
We might have some of it in the committee, but at the end of the day, that's what we're looking at from a finance standpoint, is, it just doesn't seem to make sense, and it seems to be spiraling outside of the control. And this state order, is this something that every town has to live to, or is this something because we
Every
signed
time.
up for a
This is
program?
Massachusetts regulation. It's basically a CMR 105, 170.385, which states that we're supposed to, within our original agreement, be fully staffed 24/7 within 3 years. And that's the regulation that the town of Southampton has not met. And so every year, we've tried to do stopgap measures to get closer to that, with this town meeting getting us one step closer, and they're holding a bigger and bigger hammer, and this is a big hammer that they're holding.
No, and
over
I
our heads.
understand, Chief.
And for
How
me,
did
it's about
this
providing
change?
service.
So what happened 3 years ago to make this mandate?
Before-
Why, before that, were we not held to this standard, and is a town like Beckett held to a 24/7? I'm trying to understand how we got into having to provide 24/7 by the state.
Yeah, before I came here,
Okay.
the chief at that time and the select board, which is probably none of the folks that are sitting here today, looked at the ambulance service and the town needs and decided that the best interest of the town was to provide paramedic level ambulance service. So they did all the work to do that. They signed an agreement with the state to do it. They hired a new chief, which was me, to come in and make it all work. But it was never funded.
It was voted at town meeting to do it, but not to
Not
fund
to
it.
fund it.
Well, it was never funded.
Never funded,
So it
yeah.
was voted to do it, but there was no funding put in place because everybody thought it would get taken care of down the
So-
road.
And understand that, so what does it take for us to get out of this?
Um,
Because that's got to be a viable option as we're looking at a
So are you
$400,000.
looking, if you cut the paramedic level ambulance service, my guess is you would you would cripple the fire service at the same time. At this point.
Why is that?
Because
I'm
most.
just trying to educate. I'm not
Yeah, yeah,
giving a hard
yeah,
time.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
we're talking a lot of money here and we're going down a
Okay,
hole.
yeah, well, it's, in that, if you want to provide an ambulance in town, if that's important to you,
100%.
okay, then that ambulance can be provided either basic level service or paramedic level service. A basic level ambulance service, pretty much, you're loading and going to the hospital. A paramedic level service, if you have an issue, they can administer drugs, they can do a lot of therapies right there at your bedside, which give you the advantage of having better outcomes when you get to the hospital. All that pre-hospital care means that you have better outcomes
Absolutely.
for you and your family afterwards.
And we didn't have that
We
prior
did
to
not have
that.
it. We had a basic
Okay.
level ambulance service, and it was a call ambulance service. So we were missing tons of calls, and it just wasn't really identified because it was
So
going to
you
other
got a chance to
communities.
gain more revenue because you're a higher
Well,
level.
so what I did, when I came in, I worked to cover more calls. I mean, I've increased staffing from 30 members to almost 54 members. I've worked, and we've got 18 paramedics that are working for Southampton now. We've got almost, 36 basic EMTs. And then I've also increased just the fire service side of it because all these people that are coming in as paramedics are
Can do
also
both.
trained, well, they're trained, state certified for fire.
And Chief,
and
I want to
so-
be respectful of
No,
everyone's
no,
time. No, you've absolutely answered it and cleared it. We've actually increased our level of service. See, the
Absolutely.
perception that we have here as a lot of townspeople is we're just increasing the hours, not necessarily that
No, the
level of service.
is
So-
easily double from where it
Dan,
was.
you do not want to go back to the days where I'd get a call.
Yeah, and you're
Go get
responding to
the
me, Charlie, if I'm laying there?
I'd
No,
be
I
there
hey,
thinking,
I
but
understand.
not to
but-
worry, Jim would be on the other end of the stretcher.
Well, I trust you guys would do a good job,
You
but
never
no.
lied, you never forget.
And again, part of my job, I feel, on the finance committee is to ensure the town is getting value for the money we're spending. And if I look at the increases that we've spent in the fire department, which is a 90% increase, or, Mike, what's the number that Heather had?
Yeah,
right
it's a
there?
big increase, whatever.
For the
number
fire
is.
since 2012.
Oh, yeah, the service has been entirely
Yeah,
different.
you've
than
dramatically
2000.
Yeah,
increased
the
your
whole
service.
service is.
97% increase since, but the
apples and
services
oranges, yeah.
increased, and then, so.
Yeah,
No, that was-
and we're providing one of the highest levels of service, and comparative to other towns, it's actually less than other towns.
Understandable, and that was my question. I
Yeah.
just thought the hours were increasing, not the level of
Oh, no, those
capability,
are
no,
huge.
and then the revenue.
Level of service is, yeah,
And the other thing,
I appreciate
Dan,
it.
yeah,
Thank
no
you.
problem at all.
the other thing is back in 2012, the revenue was just going to Easthampton or
Oh, yeah,
Westfield.
yeah,
and-
yeah, we wouldn't even.
And tell me if I'm wrong, Chief, but, with basic service, you may have a paramedic intercept at the Easthampton line or the Westfield line.
That's
You
right.
have to transfer the patient, takes a few minutes.
Yeah.
I've ridden in the ambulance once, and I think my wife has been there a couple times in the past, and it's great to have people that know what they do.
Considering that we're really 10 miles from any hospital, that pre-hospital care is huge.
Yeah.
And so the level of service is much greater than it was in the last 3 years.
Yeah.
So that's a good point, and I'm glad you asked it. Yeah, yeah.
Our townspeople need to make informed decisions.
No, and it's not just, putting more guys on at the same old level of service. It's not that at all. It's really a much greater level of service with, associate's degrees for the guys that are running these basics rather than just a weekend course kind of thing. So,
So, did I get this right? Dan doesn't want us to show up at his house and give him a ride to the hospital?
I didn't say that.
He wants the paramedics.
So great discussion. Just kind of moving back to where we started,
Question, yeah.
the question.
What was the question?
What's the added increase in cost for the shift, and how does it affect next year? So if we've been relying heavily on ambulance receipts collected to fund the shift at 100, let's say we transferred $195,900 this year. If you add on the added increases from the special town meeting, approximately 65,000, it would be around $260,900 taken from ambulance receipts to go into the fire department EMS service for next year, right? We don't bring in that much revenue in ambulance receipts, which means we can't take it from that account, but it means the revenue to fund that needs to come somewhere else. If we are looking at and I saw the updated revenue estimate on the updated sheet we got. You know, if we're looking at being close to a, level service budget, whatever you want to call it for next year, where revenues and expenses are basically barely going to cover each other, where do we find the $80,000 that it's going to cost to pay for this service? And how do we earmark it? Where do you we got to put it on paper somewhere, put a Post-it to it, and say, this is something that needs to be watched. I think it's something you consider when you vote for the article, but it's something that if it's approved, we need to plan for immediately, right? Because that $80,000 needs to come from a revenue source. If there's no revenue source, it means a service, a position, something gets cut, right? It needs to come somewhere.
Mike, I hear you, and I personally agree with you. I'm looking at the revenue from the fire department, just to use round numbers, it's like 200,000. We're gonna be short 60, 80,000. I don't know at this point in time. I think we have a necessity here because of a license that we have to move forward at town meeting. It also gives us some breathing room to move forward for next year to try to find these revenues and see if we have to sort this out and become more creative.
See, so then you take the 80, right? And then we talk about, let's move on to the next item, the transfer from town administrator salary to building department, right? So Ed's salary's been negotiated, we'll call it, it is what it is for the budget this year, right? We're still gonna have to fund that at 100% next year. But if we take money from that account and move it to a different line item, another reoccurring cost, that's more. So let's say that brings it up to 90,000, 95,000 for next year in added revenue, right?
Just use numbers.
That's something we need to find today. Now, that doesn't take into consideration increases at the school, increases for contractual CBA agreements at the highway. I'm sure they're still at to whatever their percentage is, but
But the building commissioner's office seems to be generating revenue that negates its expenses.
Okay.
So in that account,
seems to be, though.
Seems to
You know, that's the thing. If it's on paper and this is definitely what we're going to bring in, once again, it becomes a cyclical revenue source. It's not exactly
Just a
something you can-
forecast, just
you
an
know,
estimate.
well, I mean, look at us with free cash. Free cash for the last 3 years has been somewhere around $500,000.
Right.
Which means that we've been extremely prudent, very conscientious with our budgets and that. And so when the audit came through and our free cash was certified, we ended up with free cash on the plus side. Which is good, which is what we should do. But it also tells me that maybe we can take and address a couple of things here because of the fact that our free cash has been so good for the last few years. Maybe we can expand a little bit more.
So
But the problem is, these are all forecasts. Everything in this budget is a forecast. It's like the state now saying that they're getting more revenues in than they expected, which may play into more money coming into the towns in undesignated revenues. Again, forecast. But for this town meeting, we need this to keep the building department solvent in the sense of moving forward, and we need to keep our fire department solvent in the sense of the license in that. And it gives us a few months to reevaluate where we're gonna go for our annual town budget.
So, I agree. I just feel that conversation that we're having today, that needs to continue, right? Because if we see the projections and we're looking at these transfers, it could mean someone's job, right? It could mean a layoff. It could mean something.
It could very well
There's
mean-
adverse sides to this as well without the service, but there's people that could very well be affected, and I just feel like putting more of the heads together, talking about this, trying to figure out the ways. Where was the 400,000 for free cash, right? What line items were those in that we over budgeted? Wasn't a windfall, right? There was some reason we put the money there. Why did we put it? Where did it fall short?
It's estimating a lot of times.
And some of it's estimating revenues that came in higher than we expected.
And revenues we didn't anticipate, like collection of back taxes and stuff like that.
Yeah, these things happen that there's no way of forecasting some of them.
Yeah, I mean, I was just in a budget meeting today, and I had to forecast revenue for fiscal year 19, and it's like, you know, what was it last year, what was the year before, and you project forward, and then every quarter you look at it and you adjust it as needed. I think Dan rightfully.
But we don't, so not to interrupt,
Yeah.
but we don't look at it quarterly, right? We don't do that. We don't sit down as a group
should.
and do that and adjust and plan, because if we did, we may do things differently. We may not look to appropriate all of free cash into capital operating and spend it on things that you may be able to save for a future consumable cost, right?
Oh, one other thing, since you went left there, let me go with you.
Sorry.
No, that was good, that was good. What we've been trying to do in the past, and we have never put the teeth into it, and hopefully the Ed's here, since last night and tonight we're just stacking up your job, is that we approve a budget and we gotta make the department stick to it. I mean, we always say, okay, well, we need more for overtime here, we need more for this, and we give it. You know, if this is a budget that's approved, you live within it, and if you can't, if you need to take a furlough or lay off a person, that's up to you.
It'd be great to see actually a comparison of how people are doing with their budgets, department-wise.
Well, that's again the expense.
Money-wise?
Yeah, well, so let's say, you know, highways budgeted for $1 million and they come in at 700 grand
Well,
or
we get the
800 grand or $1.2 million, just to see how over a 5-year period, each department is doing during their budgeting to show maybe where some of the extra items are being hidden.
We go through this on a regular basis, and Vicki is
Suicide.
back to giving us expense reports on a regular basis. So we
Yeah.
see that every,
And if you look at the, this is like, not up here talking about.
but I guess what I'm getting at, nobody likes to be the hard guy and say, oh, you know, sorry, you gotta do something. We need to do that. I mean, that's the real world.
Doesn't show you what the budget was and what the actual was.
Yeah,
But I
see,
can add that
actually-
if you want, and
Yeah,
that
no, I
would be
think
easy enough.
that'd be good to get an understanding of who, as a department head, is doing a good job of that budgeting, where we're getting those misses, where we can kind of anticipate.
Yeah, yeah.
Because you know, again, I'm not accusing, but I've seen it out there, people have the end of year budget, it tends to get flushed.
Yeah.
Whether it's needed or not to get flushed.
Yeah.
So they maintain their level budgeting for the next year.
So where I was going originally, sorry, is you had said that the finance committee needs to look at the finances, which is absolutely true, I agree. But from our point of view, we need to look at the finances and also the services provided to town. You know, if we need the level of service, we need to figure out the funding. So we're kind of in the middle here, working with you folks. We gotta figure, you know, you've got the school here, you got the fire department, you got everybody else, so everybody's looking for more money.
I just wanted the easy job looking at the numbers.
It's not an easy job, yeah. You're not getting away that easy.
So I guess, you know, Mike was talking about the money and where's it gonna come from for things for next year and whatnot. Not that you have to earmark this for next year, but for instance, one of the things that if it passes that town meeting in September, yeah, listen to me, in special town meeting in January, if we pay off that Halloween storm loan that we've been budgeting 15, but this year we did 10, we took it down 5. We have that extra, it's not really extra, but we have $10,000 that we don't have to set aside for that loan.
Put it on a post-it, right?
So-
It needs to go, put it on a post-it. That information needs to go somewhere.
Yes.
So that
So that you can use that, for instance, for the building
Right.
commissioner if you had to, because there was money.
Ongoing money back into the
Correct.
budget.
The assessor's office has Mark in it now, and there's not 2 people. And whether the assessors decide they're gonna do that and keep her at where Mike was and have part of the money for an assistant, you don't need all that salary that's in there currently. You probably have 10 or 15 grand that you can take away from the assessors, still keep them whole, still keep them where they need to be, and put that someplace else. So we wouldn't be increasing those pieces, but we would have some money, and I've been trying to, when I've been thinking about it, just writing them down for future reference, so, for what it's worth.
So I guess we're both kind of going back and forth with the agenda here, moving around.
I want to finish with the special town meeting first,
Okay.
because I have another piece here I have to throw out to everybody.
Could I just mention something too, Charlie?
Sure.
Since we're still somewhat talking about the fire department, I just want to say that I think it's unethical to expect personnel to stay in the existing conditions without having some type of sleeping quarters, and I know that's one of the other articles on there.
Yeah, it's
If anybody is interested, they can go down there and have a little tour and see whether they want to sleep in the current fire department. So I just wanted to mention that. I know that, Dan, you had mentioned about the quarters, and I appreciate the discussion. I think it's been very helpful, but I also just want to just say that I know that that's one of the articles, and I think that it's a building that's, you know, extremely old. It's just not conducive, and hopefully in the next several years we will have a new public safety complex. But right now, I just think that it just doesn't make any sense for them to stay there.
I agree, and all I'm trying to paint is the full picture.
Yeah,
So
I
as
know.
we move into the third shift, it's not just what we're taking out of the ambulance receipts, it's we gotta buy that. Now there's an operating cost to that, there's more electricity to it, there's gonna be a depression schedule associated with it, unless we don't depreciate. So, I mean, you know, that's all. I'm just painting that whole picture, so again, to me, personally, it's high on the list. I mean, I got 4 children, very high on the list, but again, my job, I feel, as part of the finance committee, is to show the full, complete, short-term, long-term cash flow impact. And that was it.
Thanks.
And I don't want to sleep there.
Not even in a new trailer?
You don't want us to pick you up.
Maybe the ambulance I'd sleep in the new one.
All right, write that down. Dan doesn't want us to pick him up. He doesn't want to sleep in the trailer. Boy, Dan's got a lot of conditions. The other article is Article 4 of the special town meeting. That article pertains to protocols relative to the town budget process. That article that was drafted was submitted to town council. Town council came back with a number of red flags. I just got the redraft from town council.
Okay.
I don't know if Ed shared it with anybody yet. So, Mike, you should have it. Robert, I'm assuming, did the town moderator get it?
No.
All right. So, Robert, you want my copy, so at least you have, yeah, you want to make a few copies? Okay. But it changes that article, and the thought was, Robert and I were talking about having a motion on the floor to change it to what town council's recommending. So everybody's aware of this, there is a change in that article.
Virginia, did you get a copy of that? Are you the only one from the bylaws committee that's here?
Is this the retyped? This is retyped with the corrections that the town council wants?
I believe so.
Okay.
Ed?
So this is the new one, so you just compare it that way. Got it.
She's making some copies.
What's that? Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
we just got
today.
it too.
It just happened. I mean,
So-
Yeah.
Still wet.
I guess so it's different, right? It went from 8 items to 4.
I have
There's
not-
obviously language changes what was the reasoning behind
too restrictive.
too restrictive? So,
The feeling was that if the town didn't follow the protocol that was adopted at town meeting, in other words, the finance committee, the select board, town administrator missed a step, a technicality would occur that could challenge the budget at town meeting.
okay. So do you expand it to a procedure and just adopt it locally versus,
Yeah.
right?
Well,
If that's what
looking
you
at the
want to do,
process.
if you
But
go
I
down that
haven't had
road.
the opportunity to read that either. That showed up like 4:30.
Yes.
So, but I wanted, because we're all here, to get it out to everybody so you saw that there is a change in this. And it basically is a procedural one relative to the fact that it was just too restrictive with the way it was written.
Okay.
Francine Tishman, 83 Glendale Road, member of the Finance Committee and a very temporary stint on the Bylaws Committee. So I have an understanding of the intent behind the detail of the original Article 4. And that was, none of this happened. we would get to April 15th and scramble for a budget. So we got very specific about deadlines just to keep the process going and to keep the dialogue going, which really wasn't happening either. So if you want to adopt something broader, I can understand that. But somebody has to put some other working procedure in mind that's going to work for everyone else.
The hope is there's now a full-time town administrator with a number of years of
Yes.
experience that can focus in on this better,
Yeah, I understand, but
you know.
he has to depend on other people to deliver information to him.
Oh, absolutely.
But
And
he can
so,
go
I
out
mean,
and grab it too.
It all has to work. And so by being as rigid as I think this document was, it did intend to have the outcome that we can all live with and work with and refine until it goes to town meeting. 'Cause
You must
what
appreciate
we
that-
have right now isn't working.
You must appreciate that the select board didn't have an issue with this.
Okay.
But when it goes to council and they do a review, we get a different set of eyes looking at it. And that's what's occurred.
But they didn't live what we lived.
They haven't experienced this,
So
no.
that's all I'm saying. So behind the scenes, the footnote should be some kind of a schedule that everybody abides by. That's all I'm asking.
Virginia Ahart, 27 Fulmer Road, a member of the Bylaw Review Committee in this case. We are meeting tomorrow, and it would be nice if we had a copy of this. And,
Vicky is copying it right now.
okay,
Have enough, you're getting mine right now. 'Cause I can
it
print
could be, we need to perhaps endorse it or something.
I totally agree with you, Virginia. The
So-
reason I brought it up, and I even said to Mike that we're not gonna get out of special town meeting until I bring something up, is because this just came in.
Yeah, I am aware of that. I'm just saying if we can look at this tomorrow and deal with it. And
I don't know if these
It
folks
might
over here
be-
need to
Something's printing on the printer.
it might be something that we could say looks good, let it go,
Right.
and support. But we are meeting at 10 o'clock tomorrow.
And there's still a question with the town moderator of, does this article meet the spirit? Oh,
Yeah, it's pretty broad, so.
Is it easier to remove it from the special town meeting? I mean, realistically, we got it today. We were meeting this evening to review all the articles and recommend, not recommend. This will be the first time we see it. The bylaw committee is meeting tomorrow. The moderator still needs to review. I mean, is this something we
Maybe-
postpone until the annual?
Maybe we should, go to the annual.
I would suggest that we let this go forward and then we make a decision at town meeting, because we can always pass over it if we want to.
Yeah, it's pretty simple.
It's
There's
very
still
similar.
there's still some dates in there, it's not as restrictive, it seems it's not
I
there.
wouldn't want to make a decision
Yeah.
based on the fact that nobody's read something, when they do have a couple of days to read it. And like I said, we can pass over this at town meeting, so,
So we will review it as if it's a 100% legitimate article, and then we will, if something comes up between now and the meeting, we can.
Yeah,
we torpedo it, that's all.
Okay.
and you can let us know your thoughts after your meeting. And
Town moderator's about to speak.
Are you gonna print this out and replace this article with this for the town meeting, or are you just gonna pass this out?
I'm sort of going to listen to the town moderator and get sort of an insight as to how his feeling is, because he's the conductor of the orchestra.
Robert Floyd, 15 East Street. I attended some of the bylaw committee review meetings in the audience, and I happened to be there for pretty much all the participation for Article 4. I personally didn't weigh in on my opinions. I had some questions. Article 4, as proposed to the board here last Thursday, was extremely restrictive. And I believe that everyone has a right to say what's on their mind at an annual or special town meeting, and there should be no restrictions on any person because they're on a particular committee. Having read this very quickly, this falls under the radar. It seems very acceptable. I will go through every verb, but so far, this is less restrictive. And as it states in the beginning, as written, it is suggestive. So far, it looks good.
So then to answer your question, I would suggest to the town administrator that he incorporates this as the motion for the town meeting. And in that handout, people will see it.
So you're saying leave it the way it is and hand this out, or change the book?
You can't change the article.
Change
the
You
book.
can't
Change the book.
But
Okay.
we put together the motions that are handed out, and what we do is we put that as the
Okay.
motion.
That's the motion.
That's fine.
Okay, so everybody gets to see it that way.
Right.
And on top of that, we can take and put this on the town webpage so it's out there.
A motion has wiggle room as long as it's within the four corners of the intent and the wording of the article. And so far, this seems to
Okay.
satisfy that requirement.
So you're okay with this?
So far, again, if I see a verb, adverb, you'll be the first I'll call.
And I'll make sure there's some adjectives on my end. And Michael, are you comfortable with it?
Yeah, we'll review this evening. If something
Okay.
comes up or it doesn't look like it is, but
If something comes up. And Virginia?
We'll review it.
Okay.
Good.
All right, so I guess we can step away from special town meeting and move into, I guess, next year's revenues. You want to do it that way? Sure.
So, Charlie, do we get,
Next year, which is,
has the finance committee voted to see what they're gonna,
Finance committee, in my mind, has not voted on anything.
you haven't voted on nothing, okay,
Next, after this meeting,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
after the scheduling issue.
Hi.
Seeing too much of each other here.
So, in looking at these, we're talking about revenues for 19, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Looking at the revenues for 19, which I think may had mentioned and spoke to Bob about prior to his departure, in doing the tax recap for FY 18, even though we had enough money in our overlay, which is what we use for abatements, to cover the 5-year average, which is what is the DOR recommendation is, they have noticed that over the past couple of years, our abatements have increased a couple $1,000s each year. And so in 18, we put $45,000 in. Basically what you do is, here's all the money you can collect in taxes, we're gonna deduct whatever we think we're gonna abate for the year. We put in $45,000, anticipating that we were gonna have $13,000 or $15,000 already left in the overlay account from the previous years, because we can combine them into one account where we don't have to separate them by levy year. Probably too much information for some people, but. So, having done that, it was too little to cover what's been increasing over the past 5 years. So this $45,000, that's an estimate, is probably gonna have to go to about 70. Per, I'd had a long conversation with Deb Wagner, and there should be enough in there. I don't know what's gonna be left from this year, when we get to that point, but their recommendation is it should be probably enough to cover what you anticipate, because it's been increasing over the years. So they let it go through this year after talking to Tony Racis and Mary Jane Handy there. So they're gonna look at that pretty strictly next year when we do the recap. So I wanna be sure that we have enough money in there. So that is going to reduce whatever this projected revenue piece is gonna be, just throwing that out there.
So
So,
reduce it by 25,000.
about $25,000, yep. So,
So that would make it roughly 298.
somewhere around there, yeah. So that's, yeah, they're gonna be looking at that pretty closely. They let it go this year, but next year they're gonna look at that, and they're gonna probably kick it back if it's not enough, so we just have to be aware of that.
Okay.
Sorry for the bad news.
No,
could be worse.
Of course, yes. We could have kicked back our tax rate this year, we would have been all in trouble.
yeah, that would have been. All right, so you want to get into projected expenses, or you want us to get into Where do you want to go?
I think it's good. I think it's good to address the known projected expenses. What we know today, we may not have a lot, but, so I talked to Donna earlier through email, just about two of the larger expenses, the health insurance and then the Hampshire County retirement. So it looks like health insurance, group health insurance will be going from 881, so 881,000 to approximately 931,000. So we'd be looking at approximately $50,000 expense increase there.
How much?
50,000.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then retirement contributory goes from 675, 546 to 745. Vicky doesn't have her calculator.
I do.
So 70,000. So that's 70,000 in our, insurance and benefits categories, which, those are usually the bigger of the two that goes up that she saw the projection in.
Like, were those increases from percentages or headcount? I'm just trying to understand what.
I don't know. I know, so for the Hampshire County retirement, I think she had a meeting today where they actually went over the figures, and then she was given a projected estimate of a 4.7% increase for the health insurance, something along those lines.
That's direct from our insurer.
Yeah, that's probably where it came from. So, so revenue expenses there, 50,000 and 70,000, so that's 120,000 in, you can call it employee benefits.
Which is kind of where we were this year.
Yeah.
It was like 140 total.
Yeah, it was a little more. The other one, which I don't have the information for, but would be town side collective bargaining increases, right? So if we had a figure,
Yeah, we need that figure.
if it's taking non-exempt out of the, what are we on the hook for that? If it's 60,000, 50,000, I don't know.
But we need to know what the negotiated contracts are, and we also need to know a figure for the non-union employees.
If it's a, sorry, it's going off. A figure if it's something that's to be considered as a priority for next year, right?
Well, I mean, if we're giving the union employees a 2% because of contract agreements, we should at least look at the non-union employees, see where we are financially, to see if we can make a good faith effort to do that.
Yep, I would agree. I think looking at it is definitely something that should be.
Question, does that include the teachers, the salaries that you have?
No, so that would be, I figured
That'd be in the
Aaron would
school.
come up at some point to kind of talk about the school once we
Yeah.
get the expenses here.
Now, police and dispatch their contract ends June 30th, even though it seems like we just settled it.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
So they're gonna negotiate a whole nother contract starting July 1st in
I
2018.
thought we just went through all
We
that.
did, but it took a long time. It took like a year and something.
It ends June and you start negotiating July?
No, the new contract will start July. So we
Oh,
don't
okay.
know.
I was gonna say.
No. So we don't know,
Boom, like that.
you're gonna, I think Mike was anticipating another 2%, but we don't know what they're gonna negotiate. They might ask for 3%. I mean, and that's dependent on who's gonna negotiate that from this table.
Yeah.
I'm assuming it's.
I hope so.
But I'm just saying, so we don't know what that's gonna be. So what happens is that if it's not finished by July 1st, you have to go by what the old contract was. Then you'd end up with retro, and then you'd have to get more money from somewhere.
So we still gotta take the assumption that everything's
That is
2%.
2%, correct, yes.
So the other one, which we talked about earlier, would be the fire department EMS, right? I mean, you could earmark that as a 60,000 to 70,000 increase,
I think we
For
should
next
put
year.
that in there just so it's there.
so you know what it is.
We've already spent the 298.
Right. And that's where we are, and that's the same exact level of services from
Yeah,
this
nothing.
year. So, I don't have any other information for larger increases expense-wise, but do you want to talk about the school?
I have one thing before you come up.
Okay.
One of the things, and I'm not quite sure where we are in terms of net metering credits for the solar, because we signed that 20-year agreement. We're supposed to be getting net metering credits, which we are supposed to save, $12,000 a year. you know, in this building and whatnot. So I don't know how that plays into, excuse me, next year's budget. Are we gonna get that next year? How does that work? Do we decrease, you know, our utility costs where you might have $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 you could put into another bucket because you're gonna save it on net metering credits for the electricity for this building and, you know, the fire station, the police station, the highway. So I don't know how that's gonna play out, but that's something to remember, that if we're gonna get it, we should budget accordingly.
Yeah.
So, because water will keep water because they're an enterprise fund, but, you know,
It's a
we were
revenue
told
source.
$10,000 to $12,000. So,
Everyone's lighting expense should come down. or
so we're,
everyone's
yeah, but I guess I'd have to call Zach Holt and find out the scoop from him, so.
Yeah, then we had that
From
cow
HR.
power too that we signed recently, remember that?
The what?
That was like $8,000, cow power, that was like another 8,000 projected.
Oh, from Hampshire Council of Governments.
Also Zach did that as well.
Yeah, Zach did both.
So anyway, just thinking about that, we might be able to decrease those a little bit, so.
I would, in regards to the 2 power purchases, I would request commitment letters from them on when you can expect that. That should be something they should provide you, like when the facilities will be up and
Ed,
running.
you want
and
to follow up on that?
those
I
credits.
agree with you, Mike. It's time to know.
Just knowing where I work, I mean, sometimes things get delayed with those. Those things are expensive to build. There's circuit studies. There's a lot of things that go along with that, and sometimes that holds projects up. So just a commitment letter would be something good to have. One last thing, which Tammy Walunas let me know earlier. So the Hampshire Regional Assessment for next year is actually $13,000 less than this year. So there's no increase. There's a savings of $13,000 as of today, as of preliminary budget review, and those types of things. So that's another heavy hitter that's kind of off the board. We won't have to be worried about as of today.
Erin Kuchar, 49 Coleman Road, School Committee. So I think we had sent back in December, Bobby had sent a estimate of what we're looking at. We've talked about this ad nauseum, that we don't have the money in school choice. So if we level service fund, we need $412,000. So 278 used to come from school choice. So we would, in the past, we've never had that much, but because we have no money in school choice anymore, and that's level service funding. And the one thing I'll just put out there and say as a school committee member and as a town member is that obviously we're adding these up and there's like a large hole from what we're saying in revenues that we have, is that we think of us as a town providing services, and every service is treated similar, so that we all be asked to look at things the same way. And that's all. And what I mean by that is, last time the school got the brunt of the cuts. We've had to lay off teachers. We had to cut down specials. I just ask that if that's something that has to be considered, that we as a town think of every single service and say every single service has to be. I don't want to hurt anybody, but if that's what has to happen, we all have to look at it together. So that's all I'm going to say on that. And I don't know where we're going to come up with the money. We're very, very worried at the school right now because I'm even not sure. We already have 2 classrooms that only have 3 teachers. So you're looking at cutting a number of teachers. I don't even know if we can even have that many kids in a classroom. So it's something that's very, very, very serious that I don't know what we would do. So kind of putting that out there for numbers. It's 412, so.
Could I ask a question that has to do with the school? Not specifically, Erin, I don't know if, I think Vicki probably is the best person to answer this. One of the expenses here, can you explain what the IDEA grant is and why it's 456% over budget?
Yeah, it's the 94, 142. Because we get quarterly payments from the state, and we probably didn't get a quarterly payment yet.
Okay, so you're not concerned about it?
No, I'm not concerned, and I'm very in touch with Bobby Jones, the administrator, and she looks at these every year. Yeah, so, for instance,
The grants are based on, they're drawdowns, they're reimbursements. You have to spend all the money first, you send it to the state, then they will give you the money back. Then we will receive the money. So more than likely, we have spent that money, but we haven't gotten our payments yet for this particular year.
Okay.
So that's how,
Why did we budget so low then?
we don't budget anything. That's a rollover from the
Okay,
previous
so that's
year.
just a
Just a
wash, you
rollover?
just haven't gotten paid
We
yet.
just have
And
not
you're
gotten the
not
money
worried about
yet.
getting paid?
No, because the school would let me know that they don't actually have that grant available and they wouldn't spend it. And then at the end of the year, they go through and decide, okay, well, we need to move that money probably from school of choice. So I'm going to throw some numbers out at you for school of choice money. So I just want to, because people are under the misconception that the school has all kinds of funds. So if you look at what we took in from school of choice versus what we actually spent, the only year we didn't spend as much money as we took in was 2012. So for instance, so I'm going to just use, like, 2014, we took in $396,000, we spent $396,000. In 2015, we took in, the state gave us $394,000 on our cherry sheet. The school used $452,000 to supplement their budget. 16, the state gave us $435,000. We spent $511,000. The school spent $511,000 of their school choice money to just get that level service. In 17, the state gave us $390,000, and the school spent $489,000 of that money. So whatever we didn't spend, like in 12 and 13, would roll over, but we've outspent what we've actually taken in, so they've had to eat into those reserves that they've had from previous years, so.
And we don't have enough school choice. We saw kindergarten had gone down.
Yes.
We didn't even fill our slots. We used to have a list. So we're just not, I don't think we're attracting some of the same kids we used to.
Are we filling the classes with residents then, or?
We had spots. We could have filled them more. We could have added more school choice kids.
So does that mean we need less teachers to teach
No,
kindergarten?
they had to, we're talking, what's the number? I mean, you're talking maybe.
I have 63 school choice students.
No, but I'm like talking kindergarten, like how many extra kids could we really put
Oh,
in
we
there?
probably could have put 6 more.
Six, I mean, we're talking like 6 kids. We're not talking like, but up to this point, we've only seen increases in requests and we've seen waiting lists. And this is the first year, which was kind of upsetting, that we didn't have a waiting list for kindergarten.
So the revenue is going down too then?
It kind of ties into the revenue of the growth in town. We're saying that we projected 180,000, we're only 127,000 for growth revenue in town. So it's kind of a trend that less people seem to be coming to town.
Oh, my last plug. I was listening, and the national average for per pupil spending is 11,400, and we spend 10,800, third lowest from.
Just so you know,
I know
sitting
it's
away.
not you. I want people
No,
here to hear it.
well, you gotta stand by the microphone if you're gonna do that. That's what I was trying to point
I
out,
want
is
them to
sitting
hear
over
it.
there doesn't.
Okay, I want people to hear that the national average per pupil spending is 11,400 per student. We in Southampton spend 10,800 per student, which is the third lowest in Massachusetts from the bottom. So I just want everybody up there
they
to
can
hear
hear
that. I know you guys have heard it. I just want it to be talked about.
So the difference is only like $600 per student, but it's per pupil, but it still puts us at the low.
Lowest in the state.
So there's not much difference.
We're four.
What's national, you think about it, Massachusetts education system versus the rest of the.
Correct.
Yeah.
Think of
Right.
low side.
Alabama, Mississippi, yep.
Oh, okay, so,
But us to the next person was a $400 difference. Us
Right.
to the number 4, which I thought was
And
interesting.
us to the other regional schools, and
Correct.
$3,000.
Yeah, and just some stats that were put together here on budget spent from or budget allocation from 2012 to present, 18. So the school department was a -7. So we've actually taken their budget down -7. Give you an example, and again, we talked about why the fire's up. That's up 97.9. Highway's up 58.7. Police is up 20.2. And I've got it all the way down the list of every budget item and where
but
we
the
are.
numbers don't relate to changes in service. I think that's one.
No, and that's my point, but I'm just.
Throwing out a number kind of gives the wrong impression. If
And-
fire is going up 97%, people go, oh my God. But as the chief said, it's a whole different service, so.
Which I highlighted that, absolutely highlighted that earlier, but I would question the highway department, and police is pretty reasonable at 20%. And the only point I was trying to get out here, not the other departments, was that the school department, validating the point, has received less of the funding in the past.
I just want to clarify, Eliza Pluto, principal at North School. When we talk about the budget and over the last few years in school of choice and spending more than we are taking in, we're also not taking in as many school of choice students in order to increase that revenue. We try to take in as many sixth graders that leave. So if 13 sixth graders are school of choice students and they're graduating and going to seventh grade, we try to look at every grade level, how many students can we take at every grade level, and try to take in that same amount or more. One of the things that happened in 2014 when we cut the budget and we lost 2 teachers, we increased class size at 2 different grade levels. I know I've said this before probably too, but I'll just say it again for clarification and for understanding. When families find out that they want to bring their kiddos to Norris School, and they have 2, and one's going into first and one's going into fourth, but the 4th grade class size might be at 22 or 24, and their first grader can make it, they don't want to just bring one child and not the other. So if there's no openings in grade 4, but there are in grade 1, they're not going to leave one in Holyoke or South Hadley and leave the other one here. They also, people start talking and say, well, class size has increased at these grade levels, so I don't want to go there because I'm going to find another school or a Catholic school or a charter school where there are less in the class. So once that starts getting floated around, then you have less people interested in coming. The other thing that I wanted to say is I don't know if that financial report that Bob had got floated around yet, where it said our out-of-district students was at 38 in 2014 and it's at 60.2 now.
It was last night.
Did anybody get that?
Well, that was the report that we discussed, yeah.
Okay, it looks like this.
Yep.
I don't know, was that at the select board meeting? Did it get out there into the community yet?
As of today, it should have.
Okay.
Yeah, it's supposed to go on the website, you said.
Ed, did you put
Because-
it out yet?
No, I'm still fighting with the formatting on it
Okay.
to make it fit.
I just think I wasn't consulted at all when he did that report, and I get it, like you take it off of the Department of Ed website, because I went to look at each one of those points to see if this was true and valid. And one of the things is that people might look at that out-of-district pupils. The number of out-of-district pupils is increasing from 38.7 pupils in 2014 to 60.2 pupils in 2016. This is K to 12 Southampton students, and it includes the Smith Voc kids. So Norris School, out-of-district placements, when you're thinking about, when we ask for transportation for a special ed student to get transported, say, to White Oak, out-of-district placement is what you think about when you hear this. We only have 3. We have 3 out-of-district placements at Norris School. We have other students who live in Southampton who might go to the Hilltown Charter School or who might go, and the number for Norris School is very low, according to, I called Robin Deaton, our data specialist up at Hampshire, just because I really wanted to, that floored me when I saw that, and I'm sure it would floor other people, and I think that it just needs to be a little bit more explained that that's not what we talk about when we say out of district, it's the wrong wording.
Ed, can you readdress that one?
I'll see what I can do with it.
All right.
Okay, thank you.
Put a clarification on it.
Okay.
I wanna let-
I'd like to ask the select board what you believe our priorities should be for next year's budget. We need to set a tone for this coming year.
Keeping all of our wonderful employees, for one.
Okay?
It's
Priority number 1, keeping current staff.
It's tough to say because you don't want to pit the fire against police, against the school, against highway. We've
Right.
got to come up with a way to provide all the services that are needed in the town within the budget that we have. I don't know if that's a possibility. That's the problem, especially the school's going, you said 400 you're anticipating?
Yeah, so we have a 700,000 increase, and we have a 412 short,
Yeah.
because everything else is about even, so that's a tough,
I'm going to disagree with Aaron a little bit in that if somebody has to take a cut, we should all go across the board. I don't think that's healthy for anybody. I mean, if the school needs money, we got to figure out a way, or if the fire department needs money. I mean, I think we got to look at the services. Cutting you 10% and cutting highway 10%, whole different, you know what I mean? Effect. So we got to look at what that cut would mean to each department.
I think it was the theory that last time the school had the brunt of the cut and that other people get asked to be accountable and to really have to really work at their services when you're asking us to cut our services. That was what that was.
How long ago was that? I mean,
2014.
14, yeah. Because last year you got the extra 100,000. Yeah, and at the time, we were not meeting even the state minimum funding, right? Now we're at least at that for the last few years. Yeah, so that's a good thing.
So one thing I want to say, I don't want to weigh in on the select board budget priorities, that's yours to decide, but I would suggest, prior to coming up with a list of priorities, really trying to figure out where you are today and what you can do to prepare yourself for next year. Couple of notes I had here, capital and operating purchases. I am the last person that would ever tell you to use money from operational or capital stabilization for future funding. But if it's this dire, then maybe there's non-reoccurring funding items we could use those for next year, which would mean not going forward with as many articles at this special town meeting, basically building up reserves that could possibly be used to fund things in the future. The other suggestion, spending freezes and hiring, right? And I know we talk small dollars when we talk that because it's supplies and consumables, but what can we do to help bolster possible free cash for next year? What can we do? And once again, free cash should not be used for those reoccurring expenses. I talk about it all the time, but if it's this type of situation, what can we do today to help us tomorrow? And I think if you have a better idea of what you may have, it may help with the budget priorities. So
I think what I said before, one of the priorities should be, once we approve the budget, it's yours to live with, you know?
I actually like Rainey's wide open, our priorities to keep the employees that we have.
Yeah.
I don't think we need to set any other priorities at this point, just focus on that.
The thing is, I wish that we could come up with a way, it seems as if we spent a tremendous amount of money on postage and copies. And just if, we're gonna be a green community, I know it has to do with, vehicles and, insulation, all that sort of thing, but we spent a lot of money on postage, and in this day and age, it just seems like there's a lot of IT grants and things available to try to transfer us over. Is there anything that says that we can't send out emails for tax bills, or, that we have some other way of people paying than to come down to town? I just think that we could maybe move forward here.
You make an assumption that everyone has an email address.
No, I'm just saying options so that we can reduce the charge for postage and/or copies.
And people can opt in
Yeah,
to
no,
electronic.
I just want to make a comment, and I really appreciate setting the agenda and, looking to keep all employees, but I'm scratching my head here. We're hired, or we're elected by our constituents. So our priority should not be to keep our employees. Our priority should be to look out for our constituents and keep the right services for them. And that's what I'm concerned about. This is not a job about protecting. I work for a company that just laid off 12,000 employees, and my benefits are horrible. And I'm a Fortune 24 company. So, I can appreciate the job security, but we're not here to keep people employed. We're here to deliver a service to our town in a responsible way.
I agree with
And
that.
so I think we got to change our thinking a little bit, and I'm sorry, it kind of, because if we go into looking at a budget with that mindset opposed to what's the absolute necessity for this town, the results are going to be different.
We need to have the right staffing for the priorities,
Understand.
rather than back into it.
You got it.
Yeah,
Right, and people provide the service.
right.
Understand.
So it's not one that we can do. We
Right,
got to look at the
right.
whole picture.
Point taken. I'm sorry?
Do you have any priorities, or Jim?
Yeah, it's a tough situation. Yeah, but I'd say we gotta look at the service side of it, and then whatever we are, we are. And, we're gonna do our best to fund what the town needs for services with the money we have. And, those are decisions that we're gonna have to be made.
We're gonna open up the area of discussion that every time we get into it, we get into people going, oh yes. We need to generate more revenue. We have all kinds of ideas, approaches. A lot of them are long-term. The short term is going back to the override questions. Should we be looking at an override for the May town meeting? And if we are looking for an override, should we make it basically because of the school department, because of the large need they have? Or should we be fracturing it in some other frame? I am open for suggestions. I'm just putting this on the table for discussion.
So I would recommend, Michael Rosenberg, Finance Committee, I would recommend it be looked at two different ways. You prepare for the worst and you prepare for the override, because and I don't know how that works, in that type of situation, but if you go with an override, this is a big chunk of money, so no matter what, we need to have a backup budget, which would include cuts, but there needs to be a backup budget in case something happens, so.
I would think, so what you're saying, we do the budget to meet the money that we have, and then if, I'm gonna use you as an example, if the school is short $200,000, they wanna go into an override, they need to specify that if we don't get this override, this is gonna happen to the school, and do you want it to happen? Because cause and effect, I think people need to know. We're gonna lay off 3 teachers, close 2 classes. I mean, that's what's gonna happen if you don't pass it.
It may want to be a percentage of everybody. I mean, it may want to be across the board, because if the override is based on one department, wherever it is, and it doesn't go through, that department's going to suffer, and everybody else is going to be hanging in there.
And it pins the school against the town.
Right, exactly. You don't want to do that. I think you want
I
to.
used an example, sorry. Whatever it comes down to.
Yeah, I think you split it up.
Like I said, it's a conversation that,
Yeah.
any way you talk about it, it's gonna, Vicki?
I think if you were to do a general override, say it's $500,000, you say, okay, whatever that calculation, we have $63 million worth of value in our property. But then you come to and say, look, the school's gonna need this, or they're gonna have to do this. The fire department's gonna need this, or this is gonna happen. The highway department needs this, or whatever it may be. Last time we did it, it was, oh yeah, let's just do $1 million. It was all these different increments of money, and oh, here's the budget with it, and here's the budget without it. People want to know exactly what they're spending their money on. So I think if you did general for a sum of money, come up with whatever that money may be, it's $500,000, and then each department went through and we explained to the townspeople, this is what, if we don't get this 500, this is what's going to get cut. This is what's going to, happen. And if you give them those details, I think they'll probably be more receptive, more to that information than just saying, oh yeah, we want $500,000 and it's for the school, but then you can't promise them it next year because it goes into one big pot. But if you can explain to them, we need to keep these services the way they are, maybe that would be better. But I think a general override is kind of the way we need to go.
So general versus a menu.
Correct.
So
But then you explain to them, this is what we're going to use it for, you know what I mean?
Either way, we have to do that.
Yeah, well, yeah, but I think if you did general, then they might decide I don't know, that's just my
Well,
take.
general's where it ends up anyway. It's the first year, if it goes, let's say the fire department wanted $200,000 and it goes through, the following year, it goes into the
back in the
general
big
fund.
pot.
Exactly, so just go for that right
That's
after
that
that.
$100,000 the school got that will, we gotta make sure it stays in there.
So that's something that, as a select board, who knows who will be, I'm not quite sure when everyone's up, but
I'm gone in May.
so next year, when you come to this again and say the 500,000 or say it's 350 or whatever the amount might be, the priority of the select board could be, out of that new money, we want to make sure that we give 100 to this and 50, you know what I mean, like, you can make those priorities, but,
So let's
so,
let's go a little further with this. So let's say we're talking $500,000, because realistically we are,
yes,
okay? Now, we are also retiring debt next year.
correct.
And the amount of debt we're retiring probably is going to mean that the tax bill with the override is not going to change any.
It'll be I think it'll be negligible. I have to look at the numbers
It
of what
won't
that
be
may
enough, though, that it's not like we're going to have an override and it's going to be a huge increase in tax.
Correct,
So that becomes a selling point.
correct.
Now, Mike, do you want to address that? Because I'm going to move on further.
Well, I was gonna say, that's a selling point, but we also talked about leveraging that for a new safety complex, so we gotta pick whatever, we can't use it for both.
I understand
Yeah.
that, but based on what I'm seeing,
Yeah.
this is the priority today. The safety complex is not.
Because so you're gonna retire, what are we retiring this year? Oh, the North School roof. which is $135,000. It's not a huge chunk of money, but it eats into that $500,000. The big chunk of money that you're retiring your debt will be when Hampshire Regional is done, which is $300,000, which is 2020, I think it's done. And Larrabee, well, that's not for a while. So you could use that to leverage the safety complex because it's a bigger chunk of money. You know what I mean?
And that's what I see happening as the schedule.
You know, because it won't be for 2 or 3 years by the time the safety complex is kind of up and full-fledged going, so.
So if we follow that a little bit further, the Board of Selectmen can post a special town election to vote prior to town meeting. So an override vote could happen, and then at town meeting, when we're going over budget A and budget B, if the override passes, then we know which budget we're gonna focus on at town meeting.
But I guess what you don't want to do is say, okay, we're going to go for an override of 500, this is budget, give me your wish list. Like, you have to try and keep it to a minimum, like.
No, this is
you
not, this is bare bones trying to get.
Because.
There's no wish list here.
It's going to be, level services
Yeah.
to what, because
I mean, this is
everything
gonna-
increases, you know?
This is gonna require every town entity to go out and explain to the residents that this needs to pass. And if this election is, we'll say, in April, prior to the May town meeting, what it'll do, it'll put us at town meeting, at the door, knowing what direction we're going in.
You were going to say something.
Does that make sense?
Weren't you going to say something?
Yeah, I got a question, and maybe, Aaron can address it. I'm not sure, because our history is lousy with overrides, but a general override that has school, highway, fire, yada, yada, down here for $500,000 versus a menu override, school for 200, fire for this. In your opinion, do you think by grouping everything together, the school in this case won't pass? Because a lot of people say, well, I don't care about that. Or if it's just a school, you have enough people supporting the school part to come in and pass that. And we have bad history on both ways, but I'm just wondering.
Yeah, so
what
I
your
mean,
opinion
I
is.
actually think two things. I think when we did just the school and the school last time, I think some residents felt like we're pitting departments against each other. I see it, if we did a general override, would be to say we're all supporting each other, and I 100% support all the other things. So I would be in favor for it, and I think that it might help people who really want the ambulatory to say, okay, we're okay with giving a little bit to the school. I think that I would be happy if we could kind of come back as a whole town, because I've kind of not felt like we have been pitting each other, and I don't like it, and we support a lot of the stuff, so.
Oh, yeah, so I wasn't sure.
Yeah, I know, I think it would be.
I think strategy in this is important.
Right.
So just to follow up to actually the conversation you and Vicky were having, so I think it's important with the override that we make a good faith effort starting whenever we choose to go for the override, to really strap down on things and to look at the projects like I talked about with the capital expenditures, those types of things. Because if you replace a piece of equipment, or you buy something, or you hire staff in advance of asking taxpayers for more money, they're going to say, well,
That doesn't work.
it doesn't work, right? It does leave a bad taste. So just being mindful of where we go in the next few months, where we choose to put funds and move funds, and just be mindful that that could have repercussions to the voter and the taxpayer. If they see them buying something that, and I know we can't appease everyone, but if they see something that they may not approve of, it may just have a bad result for them. Right. Yep.
I think the exception would be like an emergency thing, like what happened with a boiler at the school.
Exactly.
That's something unavoidable.
Yeah, nobody's going to say anything, yeah.
I hope.
And I would just say the other thing, prior to the vote, it needs to be a public forum similar to a town meeting. There needs to be an semblance of people invited to discuss and to have, I'd like the overall override, because it allows all departments to get up and speak, to talk about why this is needed. Everyone has skin in the game at that point. It kind of brings everyone together. And having it in a large forum, like this room isn't conducive for that, right? It's just not, because there's not enough room, but something in the auditorium, something similar that we could do, similar with a driveway review you did, right? Same type of thing, having a pre-vote meeting, so,
Okay.
thank you.
We went through a lot of territory this evening. I'm gonna call for a 15-minute recess so everybody can have a pizza break. My question is going to be, do you want to reconvene and continue this discussion? Or do you feel that we've pretty much run our course, we got some ideas here, and then we'll come back?
From a finance committee perspective, I would be fine not reconvening, but we should have some sort of meeting in 2 weeks where we kind of get to work on this, whether
Yes.
it's,
Yeah, I agree with that.
you know, chair and department heads or the finance team,
Well,
right?
we need to get together with our new town administrator, just the three of us, and start tackling issues.
So, yeah, I think just meeting soon about the issues would be helpful, so. That's it.
So, does the board have anything else to bring forward?
Yeah, I just have one question for the school committee while they're here. Did you get your boiler up and running before this cold weather?
Yes, actually,
Just in time?
the Friday before last, it was finished, so it was perfect timing.
Oh.
Yes, just before the ice age hit, the boiler was running.
Oh, okay, that's great. I'm glad it worked out.
Just want to mention tomorrow evening here, the town moderator, special town meeting information session, and we'll go through every article. No votes will be taken, 7 o'clock. It will be live on our channel 191, and the idea is not to have a debate, but to get all the articles out, and for those who, you know, maybe don't have the internet and don't download, but tomorrow night here, 7 o'clock.
And you have Article 4 as changed
Yes.
for the motion, so you
Yes,
can bring
I
that up tomorrow.
I will read both, or I'll at least read the motion. I don't know about the long.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you.
Perfect.
Anything else before this board? If not, do I hear a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 It happened.